Hi there and welcome. I'd like to share what I've been doing as a property investor and property manager during the coronavirus crisis, and I hope this information will help you in what you are doing too. First of all, a quick introduction. I'm Sharon Mashan, and together with my business partner Steve, we own and run Foxdog Properties. We are based in Warrington, and as well as being property investors ourselves, our property management business manages millions of pounds worth of properties for other investors too. We've built our business and we now manage single lets and high-end HMOs. We work with investors based all over the world. And we also offer help and advice to fellow property investors who want to self-manage their portfolios confidently. I'm all for practical information, so this is not theory here. I'm an active property manager, so this is all real life stuff. And I wanted to share with you that what the latest and the coronavirus crisis is impacting us as property investors. The first place to start is with yourself. Take stock of your own position first. Think about when you're on a flight and the safety briefing starts. They always say, put your own oxygen mask on first. You need to make sure you are okay before you can help others. Translate that back to us. What does that mean? Review your own financial position, including your property investments. How much are you paying each month for your mortgage and other overheads? What's your final exposure if all of your tenants stop paying the rent tomorrow? How much is in your contingency or rainy day fund? How long can you cover your property portfolio costs from your contingency budget? You might not like the answer, but now you know your position. And it might be the answer is you simply don't have the funds to cover such costs. But at least you now know what you're facing, you know your financial gap. Now we can work out how you're going to close that gap. For example, do you have rent protection insurance in place? Now is the time to dig out the policy document and read the small print. Another example, do you have guarantors in place for your tenants? Are you eligible for a mortgage holiday? This is where your mortgage lender agrees to reduce or suspend payments for a period of up to 3 months. The specific terms and conditions are different for each lender, and you'll still need to pay this back, whether that's increased payments once they're due again or an extension to the mortgage term. And I do suggest you take advice about this though, just in case it does impact on your credit score. You should be talking to a mortgage broker for holidays here. Next, consider your ongoing property costs. The current guidance is that non-essential visits to properties should be suspended anyway, so costs of planned maintenance jobs will probably be postponed. You might also find that many contractors are not working either, as they've made a risk assessment not to do so, or in the case of some of my contractors, they simply can't obtain the materials and parts they need to even carry out some emergency repair jobs. Next, review your own personal financial situation, especially if your day job is in addition to your property portfolio. Have you been furloughed, or are you self-employed or a small business owner who has been impacted financially? Look at your household budget. Are there any savings likely now that non-essential journeys are advised against? For example, your fuel bill or costs of eating out are likely to decrease at this time. Can you apply for a mortgage holiday on your own home? Many credit card companies are offering help, such as freezing or suspending monthly payments for up to 3 months. Get in touch with them and see what specific help they can offer you. Do the same with utility companies and any other organisations you've credit with to see what arrangements you can agree. If you have been furloughed, has your employer indicated if they'll pay you on your usual date, or will they wait to pay you until they receive funds from the government? And this may be a little while longer yet, as the process to apply for furlough payments only opened this week on the 20th of April. Some companies do not have the financial reserves to pay their staff whilst they wait for government funding. Some of our tenants have been told they'll only be paid once their employer has received such funding, so they are without any income in the meantime. If you are self-employed and have submitted previous tax returns, you'll receive a payment in June or July equivalent to 80% of average historic profits for a 3-month period of March to May, up to a maximum of £2,500. You don't need to apply for this, but if you are potentially eligible, HMRC will contact you directly. You will then have to demonstrate your trading profits have been adversely impacted by the current crisis to qualify. I've shared this information with my preferred contractors who I rely on to help manage my properties, as many of them are self-employed and directly impacted by this crisis. I want to help make sure that they can return to business once restrictions are lifted. If you're a small business owner, there are lots of schemes that might be of use to you. The schemes that you might be able to take advantage of as a small business owner include furloughing yourself if you're a director of a limited company. You could furlough your staff and then apply for the job retention scheme which opened this week. If you're paying your staff statutory sick pay as a self-isolating, you can claim back the 2 weeks of these costs from government. There is the business loan interruption scheme. This came into a lot of criticism at first and has recently been amended to help it be more accessible to more businesses. However, do note it's administered by the banks, not government, and it is a loan, not a grant, so it will need to be repaid with interest. Some banks are seeming to charge what might be deemed excessive interest rates, given the base rate is now only 0.1%. I do know some brokers helping people apply for these loans, so if you want some help with this, let me know and I'll introduce you. It's possible to defer VAT payments that are due between the 20th of March and the 30th of June this year. You still need to submit your VAT return, but you don't need to pay the actual payment until the 31st of March 2021. Now, some businesses with a place of work might be eligible for business rates reliefs or business grants, and these are very specific to each business and are administered through local councils. If you're a limited company, you might have some extra time allowed to file your accounts with Companies House. Although you do need to apply for this concession, you simply can't file late. If you're self-employed, you can apply for the self-employment support scheme that I mentioned earlier. HMRC will probably only be contacting you from mid-May onwards, so there is a little time to wait yet. If you pay self-assessment in January and July, those due in summer can be deferred, so it's worth checking with HMRC. And finally, universal credit has been opened for everybody, including those self-employed. If you manage your own properties, the best thing you can do now is to communicate with your tenants and keep communicating with them. We've been sharing lots of information with our tenants through email and our Facebook pages, but it was when we picked up the phone to all of our tenants and spoke to them individually that was most productive. We had great feedback from them. They were just grateful we thought about them and made the effort to call. The majority took the time to reassure us they remained in work and would continue to pay their rent as normal. Those that have been affected thanked us for the information we've provided and committed to paying the rent where and when they can. The reaction from our tenants to this crisis has been exceptional, and I like to think this is because we've weeded out potentially problem tenants before they even get sight of a property. We have a very strict application process that not every applicant gets through. We do turn people away, and in my experience, an empty property for a month or two is better than having the wrong tenant in place. In the past, we've lost far more money in lost rent trying to evict a non-paying tenant than from any void we've had. Before this crisis, we had 0 rent arrears across all the portfolios we manage, with evictions for non-payment of rent being very rare. We've just made available our Ultimate Landlord How-To Guide. This comprehensive manual sets out in great detail the systems and processes we use, together with templates you can swipe and deploy to help you make sure you get only the best tenants too. And do contact me if you want more information on this. So what have we done to support our tenants? Most importantly, we've made sure they're aware of health guidance around social distance and hand washing. We've encouraged our tenants, particularly in HMOs, to work together in their houses to come up with a cleaning rota. People have really stepped up to this, and actually our tenants have realised the significance of the crisis and are taking this seriously. They're respecting the advice not to have friends or family visit them and keeping the place clean. We are asking them to let us know if they have to self-isolate or actually ill, especially in HMOs, and so far luckily nobody has. But there are guidance notes available from government for households impacted in this way. When tenants have contacted me to let me know they can't pay the rent, we now have a process in place to deal with this. Firstly, I check they themselves are okay, they're not self-isolating or showing symptoms. Every response is a little different depending on their circumstance, but every response is considerate and compassionate. I do make it clear that their rent is still legally due, but we appreciate this situation is outside of their control. I do make reference to a future repayment plan, but we'll discuss this later once we have more information about their circumstances. I then provide them information about the job retention scheme. Many of our tenants work for small employers who are still struggling to get their heads around what this means and how it might impact their employees. Where tenants have lost their jobs altogether, I do encourage them to apply for universal credit and have been helping people in certain situations to do this. I'm also making our tenants who have lost their jobs aware that some employers are currently recruiting at the moment, for example, supermarkets and delivery drivers. I also provide links to Citizens Advice, the Money Advice Centre and the charity Step Change, and these organisations can help people budget and understand how they can manage their finances during this time. I do ask for documentation if they have been affected, for example furloughed, as you never know if you're going to need this in the future. We're finding it too early to agree repayment plans at the moment. Those that have applied for universal credit still haven't had a decision back as to whether they qualify yet or not. And as I say, the job retention scheme is only just open and payments haven't yet been made. Now, you may have heard of the Coronavirus Act. This is wide-ranging and changes some of the laws that govern us in the private rented sector. Here are some things you need to know about changes to property legislation. Firstly, the courts are effectively closed. Even if you had a valid eviction progressing before the 23rd of March, this will have been put on hold until at least June, and there's not much you can do about it. Notice periods for any reason, so Section 8 notices, Section 21 notices, have all been extended to 3 months until at least September for residential properties. Eviction for non-payment of rent in the commercial sector has been banned altogether until at least June. Face-to-face viewings have been deemed non-essential and should be suspended, and many agencies are now offering virtual or video tours for people still interested in moving once the restrictions are lifted. So move-ins should be suspended. There is government guidance on this, so you shouldn't be moving people into an existing HMO. Some people, for example key workers and vulnerable people, can be moved into an empty property. Right to rent checks are still required, but for the next 3 months can be done via technology, so screenshots on email, Skype or FaceTime calls. But there is a requirement for you to see the original document once this 3-month period expires. EPCs are still also required if you're selling or renting, but there are restrictions around surveyors attending properties at the moment, so you might struggle to get a surveyor to actually carry out an EPC check for you. Gas safety checks are still required. The gas engineers have guidance issued by GasSafe in terms of social distancing and how they can work in properties safely. Your responsibility as a landlord to fix urgent maintenance issues is still in place, so you should have suspended non-essential maintenance visits. But for example, if the boiler's not working, you've got a leaking roof or a front door lock that won't lock, these are deemed as urgent and need to be fixed urgently. So any contractors going to the house as well as any tenants need to be adhering to the social distancing rules. And final point is this Act does allow for these time limits, so the expiry date of September, to be extended at some point. So make sure you keep records as you go, keep your paperwork in order. There's likely to be some legal fallout once this is all over, and any written evidence you capture as you go along will only stand you in good stead. If you're using a letting agent, keep in touch with them too. What are they doing on your behalf to communicate with your tenants and provide them any support you need? What feedback are they giving you about any tenants that might be in financial difficulties? As a result of my background working in a highly regulated industry before I got into property investing and property management, I know the best place to go for information is the source, and in this case it's the government. There are lots of people posting online who sound like they know what they're talking about, but just check they do. We know when buying a property you should carry out your own due diligence, while the same goes for information. So the government website contains all the press releases, statements and supporting information you'll need. In communicating with my tenants, clients and contractors, I've been directing them to the relevant government website pages so the information they receive is up to date and accurate.